Essentially, what foresters and wildlife biologists do is go out in the woods and then record a bunch of data or talk to a bunch of people and then go home and write it up on a computer. So a lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, you must love like you get outside all the time." Like, yeah, I do, but then I also have the weird dichotomy of it's like boxing, it's like chess boxing if you're familiar with that sport where you play a round of chess and then you go and you box around and then you play a round of chess again. So it's kind of like that. It's like I'm out in the woods, I'm enjoying my time out in the woods, and then I have to sit down in front of a computer and then code for biostats. So it's like the back and forth that really wears down on you. And uh it it also like leads me on the weekends, I like to spend time watching TV. Like I'm done being outside. But people are like, "Oh, you must love to like camp and you like to backpack and stuff." Yeah, I used to. In high school, I loved it. And then my career became the outside. And I was like, "You know what? I like air conditioning. I like TV. I like chilling. Let me just relax for a little bit." Because I get my value vocationally. So I work with something that I really value, and that is just the general wildlife field. So it's like a quick introduction. I am JT Pynne. That's my last name is Pynne, not Pine, but I guess I was destined to work in the pine forest. Um, so my expertise is in longleaf pine, which is the really drastically reduced ecosystem that occurs or used to occur all throughout the coastal plain. It's been reduced to about 4% of its historic range. And a lot of people are trying to restore it. And really, the only way that you can restore it is by doing a holistic approach of multiple different management aspects. And when I say management aspects, that includes things like planting native species, removing invasive species, conducting prescribed fire, thinning your overstory trees to allow more light to come into the surface. Um, by burning and having like animals on there, you end up with a couple of different ecosystem services. So there's a thing called biochar, where once you burn something that's organic, you have that carbon-rich stuff. And so, like subterranean animals, and any animal that digs, like even an armadillo, they dig, they actually turn up, it's called bioturbation. They turn up all of that soil, and that cycles back through that carbon, uh, the carbon that then becomes a carbon sink over time. So yes, you're releasing a lot of carbon when you do the fire. The smoke has a lot of carbon. However, over the course of the long run, you're not leaching that much carbon, you're not losing that much carbon, and you're actually increasing the fertility of your soil, especially if you have those bioturbative animals. And then the other thing that animals do is up the trophic cascade, you have your basic herbivores. Then you have your predators, et cetera. So the basic herbivores actually conduct this really awesome ecosystem service in theory, or the theory is called selective herbivory. So in combination with fires and in combination with selective herbivory, that results in a really biodiverse and a really resilient ecosystem. That's why there's such good carbon storage. That's why the like grassland ecosystems are so incredibly important. Um, and when I say grassland, I don't mean that field right there that's a bunch of mowed Bahia grass. Those are invasive mat forming African warm season grasses. I mean the things that are like wiregrass and like a different bunch of different grasses like broom sedge or so there's even some asters, like some asters are the sunflower family, so they look like grasses, but they actually produce a flower. So there's a bunch of this like really rich grassland diversity that doesn't occur without fire and selective herbivory. We used to have, not really in this section, but just south of us in the coastal plain, that we used to have the longleaf pine savannas. In this area, it was more of like a loblolly shortleaf pine savanna, and that was managed mostly. Think about where we are by the Muskogee and Cherokee sort of overlapped a little bit in like selective tribes in this area. And they would do a lot of the management that you would see across the landscape. So a lot of the like natural fires were not natural fires. They were anthropogenic fires from the indigenous people that were here. There were natural fires that occurred. Typically, the way that would go is a lightning would strike a tree, then the lightning would sit there and smolder in the duff, in that organic layer in the soil, because the lightnings occur in the southeast, they occur during rainstorms. So how are you going to tell me that the lightning would strike and then start a fire and the rain wouldn't put it out? Well, what happens is it smolders in the duff for a little while, and then when the rain dries out and the wind starts to blow a little bit, that picks up that smoldering, creating a fire that then goes all the way across whatever landscape it's on, because it's not like in 1491, it wasn't broken up by roads, and it was managed by the Cherokee and the Muskogee. So that these ecosystems, whether it's the Piedmont where we are, typically existed with some sort of fire rotation, and that's why we're trying to restore fire dependent communities, because number one, it's super good for wildlife. It's really good for all those ecosystem services that I just mentioned. And probably the most important one is we avoid things like Gatlinburg. If you have a fire-prone ecosystem, and every single ecosystem on planet Earth outside of the desert, like the sand desert and the Arctic, has at some point experienced fire in the past geological history. In one of the periods prior to the Cretaceous, the oxygen atmosphere was so rich that if you took a wet stick and you held a match to it, that wet stick would just ignite because there was so much oxygen. So the fire triangle is oxygen, fuel, heat. You take away one of those things, you take away the fire. So we really use that when we're doing the prescribed fires. So if you're thinking about managing, you manage it like a piece of pie. You've got a slice that you don't do anything to, and that serves as like a bedding area for a bunch of species because they can live in that refugia because you can't see in there at all. And then you've got your other piece that you burn constantly because you want to get turkey and quail, which respond well to annual fire. You've got another piece that you burn every 2 years because that's a pretty traditional fire rotation for the state of Georgia, pretty much anywhere. And you've got maybe a wetland, so we have a tupelo bog here that burns maybe every 200 years. But fire will creep up into it. So that's one of my goals for next year. It'll be really cool because we'll actually burn this section and it'll burn back into the swamp and back into the creek. So that one you'll definitely want to be here for. All right, so a little bit more of the applied stuff and then we'll get walking. Fire is awesome and we use it as a tool, like I said. And there's a couple of tools that help us utilize the fire because our goal is to not have escaped fires. We want to keep our fire where we want. So we do it under a certain set of prescriptions, of weather prescription. That's why it's called prescribed fire, prescribed burn. Colloquially, you'll hear people call it burning. Oh yeah, I burned my property this past weekend. You're like, what? Oh yeah, it was a prescribed fire or prescribed burn. Yeah. So one of the ways that we keep fire from escaping is by cutting fire breaks, which is we'll walk along a couple of the fire breaks. But let's say the fire does jump over that break. We have something like this where we can run out there and we can just smash that fire out. Because you remember the fire triangle, what am I removing here?
Oxygen.
Nice! I got a sticker for you later. Okay, yeah. And now the other tool that I like to use is a fire rake. And what part of the fire triangle am I removing now?
Fuel.
Fuel! You guys are getting stickers all day. So these are just some of the tools that help us stop the fire. But how do we start the fire in the first place?
With the fire starter.
This is called a drip torch. And inside of it is a mixture of, it's empty right now, mostly. But inside of it's a mixture of diesel fuel and gasoline. It's got this little pigtail on it. So the fire ignites on this wick, and the gas comes out of this, and then you just pour it, and the fire will pour out with the fuel. It doesn't go back because we do have this little curly Q pigtail that helps us not blow up. And this is the main tool that people use by hand nowadays that makes it super easy. There's also like ATV ignitions where people have a giant what are they called? Flamethrower on the back of their on the back of like an ATV or something, and they just shoot flame out into the as they drive by. Classic old school quail plantation burning was grab a cooler of your favorite adult beverage, throw it in the back of your truck, grab a drip torch, and just hang off the back of your truck and drag fire along while you're drinking your beverages. That's old school management. We can't do that anymore because there's a lot more regulations on it. Yeah, I mean, so like going into the first step, you have to have a goal. Then you have, so our goal is wildlife habitat management. Second step, you have to have a plan. You use weather and different fire breaks and firing patterns. Oh, the other one that I forgot to mention is aerial ignition, where you can actually fly over with like a helicopter and shoot out ethylene glycol ping pong balls and ignites little areas. I burned on the Tallulah Gorge last year, and it was 1,000 acres of like steep terrain, so they mostly ignited by the helicopter. Yeah, so then you make your goal, you develop your plan, you conduct your burn, and then you do a review, and then you do that repeatedly for the next 10 years, and you have yourself a beautiful, rich understory that you can really predict what the fire will do. So in Gatlinburg, that whole situation had not been burned in a long time. And so the fire traveled easily because there was so much of a buildup of fuels. If you burn regularly, you don't have as big of a buildup of fuels. You're still at risk for wildfires, but you can control them a lot easier because you already have your brakes installed. You understand what the fire behavior is going to do. And if you have a reduction of fuels, then you're actually going to be able to predict the severity and the intensity of that fire. So you're not going to have as much of a western wildfire knockdown blow down. You're going to be like, oh, most of my pine trees are still alive and they didn't crown out because I've been burning this regularly. So that's what's really important about getting the word out about fire in Georgia. Is wildlife habitat, fuel reduction, and just general ecosystem services. Now, anybody have any questions? If not, we'll just take off.
Have you seen issues with private owners in the areas you're doing burns? Because like that's one of the reasons why California was having such issues in the Paradise area, because private owners kept suing to get the prescribed fires stopped.
Yeah.
And then it led up to.
In specific areas in Georgia, there is some negative ideals, some negative or ideas about prescribed fire, about fire in general. Particularly, I think there's some associations around the Pine Mountain area that don't want to see fire ever in there, when traditionally, I mean, historically, that was like a really, really fire. It's a pine ridge in the Piedmont Sandhills. Like, it's fire. That's a fire area. So yeah, there is a little bit of backlash, and generally, a lot of those people don't necessarily want to listen to scientists or the government that tells them it's a good thing. And so I've been like trying to branch out a little bit more on some non-traditional ways. Like we worked with Sweetwater, and we did a little social media blast with Sweetwater, because I feel like if anyone's going to listen to anything, it's going to be their like favorite local beer joint, right? If their uncle were to tell them, "Hey, yeah, I burned my property last month or last year, and I saw quail for the first time this year," then that guy or that girl who's participating in the management on their property then might want fire on their property too. So it's really more about like, I'm not going to listen to the government. I'm not going to listen to scientists. I might listen to my favorite brewery, but I'm definitely going to listen to my family members who have experience. So really connecting all those bridges to the landowners, to the minority landowners, and to the landowners who don't necessarily understand the science and the value behind fire. So that's where Georgia Wildlife Federation comes in really, really well, is because I don't wear a uniform. I'm not a government agent. We're a non-GO, we're a nonprofit. So I am like, yeah, fire's good. Like, you don't have to listen to the government. Just do some fires and you'll have better deer, turkey, quail. Because Georgia Wildlife Federation was traditionally a hook and bullet organization, which means that they really support the hunters and the fishers. And we do that with like science-based conservation management. So science-based conservation management is prescribed burn. That's the number one thing that you can do in Georgia. So for us to get the word out about that to the hook and bullet crowd, because we'll get you more deer, we'll get you more turkey. Just burn, you'll have more turkey. And then I don't have to say, Dr. Chamberlain has shown in his 1999 study on turkey populations that annual fires make turkey populations increase. I don't have to say that. I can just say, hey, burn, you'll have more turkeys. I promise you that. Here's a land management plan to tell you that. Yeah, there's a little bit of backlash. We're working on it, and we understand that in areas like this where the burn ban is in effect because we don't want to smoke out Atlanta, because there's a lot of hospitals and other institutions that support slightly health challenged people, that we don't want to have a bunch of smoke rain down on them. If I were to burn 1 acre here, it would just sit on this property. The smoke would just sit on this property. But because there's the risk that it escapes, et cetera, they won't give me a permit during the burn bans.
Who gives you that permit?
Good question. Georgia Forestry Commission is responsible for the prescribed fire permitting system in Georgia. Now, in the state of Georgia, you don't have to have a permit. You can burn whatever you want. Under the burn ban, not technically legally, but that's only a finite amount of counties around the Atlanta area. So in the state of Georgia, you don't have to have a permit. You can set fire to your own property. However, you are completely liable for whatever goes wrong. GFC, Georgia Forestry Commission, GFC will come out and they'll put the fire out. They have some dozers and some tanker trucks and everything. So they'll come mitigate the fire that has escaped or whatever. But if you smoke out a hospital, then you're liable for smoking out that hospital. If you set that fire and it escapes, you're liable for that escape. If you have your permit, then it's really, really hard to prove that you didn't do your due diligence. So GFC will have your back, and generally you can't be sued by anyone. There's not nearly as much liability if you have your permit. So you call GFC and you say, I've got these weather conditions. The temperature looks good, the wind direction is good, the mixing height where the smoke will actually go up into the sky looks good, the transport winds look good, here's my ignition plan and my fire breaks, here's my safety zones, here's a map. And they say, great, your permit is number 25 or whatever. And they're like, all right, great. They say, you have to have your fire out by 2 o'clock in the afternoon because it gets too hot or because the fog potential at night is really bad. So then they give you a permit, you're good to go. You start your fire around 10 o'clock. And then you cross your fingers and also pay attention to the weather and pay attention to the fire behavior. And it's an art form and a science. So it's a fun time. I mean, you definitely get to, it's really, really cool to set fire to the woods. So you guys will have to all come back. I'll invite everyone out. We'll get all of our inner pyros out. I know Amy is super disappointed that we're not setting anything today. You guys want to take a walk?
Yes. Let's take a walk. Are the blocks like fenced in?
No, not at all. They have a dozer line run around them.
Yeah.
So they're just fire break, that's all.
So what prevents like ecological interaction or something?
Oh,
with
nothing.
blocks?
But that's really typical. Like, I mean, it is a contiguous forest. It's just the mosaic management.
Yeah.
So we want everything to move. I mean, obviously we don't want like privet or autumn olive or the noxious invasive species to move. Like we have a patch of bamboo over there that we've kept mowed back. We don't want that to move, but everything else we want to move. There's like beautiful river or native river cane here that like Cherokee and Muskegee used to use as arrows. So by burning it, we're actually getting that to come back, and we're kind of removing some of the other stuff. But we want that to spread throughout. Well, let's walk down there. We'll talk about the outcome that's actually expected for each block. And on the way, I'll show you this little grassland on the side. Basically, we want all of that ecological movement to occur because that's how you get genetic diversity. So the flow of everything through the contiguous stand of forest is great. Right here, these little flags, they mark the dwarf sumac, which is a pretty rare plant. Most people know like the big taller winged sumac or red sumac, and they produce a berry that kind of tastes like lemonade. You can actually make sumac lemonade out of it. It's pretty delicious, pretty tangy. But these are dwarf sumacs, and they are much rarer than those. But we're lucky we just have happen to have a population that has carried on. So we've got plant people from the DNR coming out next week to look at those and see if they need to see when we need to burn them to make them continue to proliferate throughout. And then if we walk down here to this power cut real quick, you'll see the diversity that I'm talking about by mowing or conducting prescribed fire or using herbicide. Because originally, power companies would just come through with a plane and spray a bunch of herbicide on top of power cuts like this. But you'll see there's a lot of diversity that actually comes back. So just right here, we've got a couple of species of dock. This is Bahia Grass, so that's actually the invasive mat-forming species. There's some clover, some dandelions. This yellow stuff down here is called hop clover. The thistles they're cool. They're naturalized at this point. They weren't native, but they've essentially been adopted as natural. So then down here, we've got a bunch of these little cool grass species. Like all of these seeds are super good for songbirds and for quail and dove and stuff like that. And then this is all wild garlic. So if you pick some of this and you smell it, that's all wild garlic. There's so many more species in this thing. If we keep walking, we'll see at least like a dozen more sedges and rushes all down there as the soil gets a little bit wetter. This stuff is the thistle, and I don't recommend touching it because it's spiky, but you can, if you peel off all of the spikies, ow, then I already have a splinter that I can't get out. Then you can eat these little riblets like celery. Sometimes they're bitter. No, that was pretty good. Nope, it's bitter. But you can boil them down just like you would lettuce. And then here, this is the new native cane that's growing. So this will grow up into a stalk that's about as tall as me. And you can see it makes really good, like it'll be sturdier and stiff, kind of like bamboo. And so that's where the Muskegee would basically convert this into an arrow. And that's how they put the arrowhead, the flint, or whatever on it, and that's how they hunt most often. As you burn and burn, more and more plants will come back, and the resilient plants will survive, and the native ones will survive, and you end up with this like huge diversity of species where even a 1 meter by 1 meter square could have 50 to 100 different plant species. Never mind all of the biota that's inside of the soil and the herps, and the reptiles, amphibians that are like below the soil too. Right around this corner is where the Grassland Restoration starts. So this is one of our tupelo swamps back through here. The tupelos, we'll go to a boardwalk. They're like long living trees that really survive well in standing water. And if you're familiar with one of their most major products, it's tupelo honey. Okay, so in March, this stuff was completely burned off. So it's only been a couple of months, and already the sweet gums are sprouting back, which I don't really want. We've got some more thistle, or some dandelions of some sort. More dog fennel, a couple of oaks, and some of the Bahia grass again. So this diversity will increase and increase. We might eventually have to do something with the Bahia and plant some like broom sedge or some more native grasses. But in the meantime, we'll just rip some fire through it really, really hot and try to kill off a bunch of stuff first. This is an annual. So grasslands burn on an annual rotation because that really supports the grasses and the resilient forbs that produce a lot of the seeds and a lot of the fruits that songbirds really like. So grassland restoration is really for pollinators. A lot of insects, a lot of bats, and a lot of songbirds will all come pollinate and eat all of these seeds and stuff like that. And then predators like barn owls in particular. Barn owls love to roost in really old trees that have cavities, or an old house that has an attic that whatever that's dilapidated. And then they like to hunt over this area because all the small mammals that go around in here are a lot easier to catch, easier to see. So birds of prey really like these grassland species, or these grassland open areas.
How do you set the timing? Like, why 1 year versus 6 months or 2 years?
It's based on some. I mean, we've done studies on what works better for what sort of situations. Like grasslands respond well to an annual fire. Turkey respond well to an annual fire. Deer respond really well.
I do. It's intellectual property.
I would wager to guess that it's a 300-year-old tree. It's a northern red oak, and it's really old. And we burned under it, and we actually burned up to it. So there's a little bit of fire scars. We actually have one of the guys that was with us had a backpack leaf blower, and he was blowing flames all around this thing, trying to clear off the leaf litter so that this tree, we could save this tree. So you can see, here is our clear break. Here is a clear fire break. The main difference is, look at this, and what is all that litter, all the leaf litter from the oak is completely gone over here, except for what's fallen a little bit. But look at this side, all of this leaf litter is still here. So if we caught this on fire, this is what I'm talking about. This is the organic layer that becomes the duff that will eventually catch fire or smolder underneath and then continue to catch fire afterwards. So this is just a great little dichotomy because this is where we're starting our unmanaged section. There was at one point someone cut a tree right there, but there's the snag the snag becoming coarse woody debris, so it's falling on the ground over here. And then just beyond that is the snag that's still standing. And snags are super important for wildlife because like that's where a bunch of cavity nesters go. They like woodpeckers peck out a bunch of bugs in there. So that when you can see all of the cavities, there's probably something living in one of those cavities. Wood ducks, woodpeckers, wrens, warblers, raccoons, flying squirrels, gray squirrels, regular squirrels. My master's was on fox squirrels, so gray squirrels are regular squirrels. Yeah, so this is our completely unmanaged section. We will not put any fire through here. We'll not do any timber stand management. Everything that is will stay as it is, and that's really to show the value of mosaic habitat and what happens if you don't do any management. When I'm looking at this from a wildlife perspective, I see a bunch of cover. When I'm looking at this from a forester's perspective, I see a bunch of work where I need to clear out everything that's already there and plant more trees to get more money. Because foresters are more of the economic side. Biologists, wildlife biologists, more of the habitat side. If I look at this from a fire ecology perspective, I see a bunch of ladder fuels, and I see which are fuels that can carry the fire up a tree. And I see a lot of vines, and I see a lot of things on the like stumps and sticks on the ground that's all going to catch fire and produce a lot of smoke. And I see a lot of snags that can easily fall over. So I don't want to burn this really, because it's a pretty treacherous burn. And that's why we sort of left this as the ideal non-managed stand. It shows like, this is the scary part of fire. And if we keep going, these are fun daisies if you want to take pictures of some wildflowers. I took one yesterday. I don't know what daisies they are, but some daisies, one of the daisies. I don't ID asters. They're too hard. I give up. Asteraceae is the family of sunflowers, and they're called composites. And they have ray and disc flowers. So if you think about this is a sunflower. These are its ray flowers right here. This is its disc flowers. Really all about bringing pollinators into it. So the ray flowers probably under UV light or under infrared light or something would actually be kind of like beacon arrows to say, pollinate me here, come land here, get your nectar, get your pollen here. So this is one of our fire breaks. We'll walk up a little bit and it'll take us shortly to the square or to the meeting point where the 4 burn areas come in. Chamomile? One of the yeah, chamomile's an aster. That's field chamomile. Okay, cool. The wildfires that we had a few years ago in the Okefenokee, the reason they occurred is because eventually every wetland will dry out enough so that a fire can go through it. And those are generally called stand replacing fires. So some ecosystems are built on like a 200-year fire rotation. And by built, I mean adapted. Some ecosystems are on a 1-year rotation. Some are on like some grasslands can even support like a 9-month rotation sometimes. So the Okefenokee, when it was on fire, it was a stand replacing fire. If you see the 2 sweet gums back behind you, that's called girdling around where it cuts into the court cambium or it cuts into the living tissue of the tree. And then you spray a little bit of imazapyr, which is a herbicide, into that cut, and it kills the tree, but then it leaves the tree as a standing snag. So that's one of the best ways that you can do herbicide treatment for your undesirable trees that you don't want or your invasive species that you don't want. So you girdle it and then you kill it that way. There's another term for that. It's called hack and squirt, which is one of my favorite forestry terms, where they just take a hatchet and they cut off that core cambium and they take a spray bottle and squirt herbicides up in there. So the reason this one is herbicide really is because this is a bottomland. You can see it slopes down here. So that's where the water will pool a little bit. And where the wetter soils and the wetter environment is, that's where privet really likes to go. So that's where a lot of the non-native and like noxiously invasive species will go. So that's why that one's selected for herbicide treatment. Thankfully, as much as I hate it, like I said, it's really active in its defense. Listen to me sigh, but in its defense, it is theoretically only active for about 24 hours, and then it mostly breaks down. And we have enough wetlands on site that we will cycle it through before it even hits the Cornish Creek on that side or the Alcovy on this side. So as much as I feel bad, it's okay because I have to keep justifying it to myself until you don't. And then what we want, I mean, good wildlife habitat. So some of the overstory is cleared out, some of the midstory is cleared out, and the understory is growing up with all the rich, palatable, delicious species or plant species that wildlife love. And then this one, since this one's going to be burned on a 1-year rotation, it will lose a lot of these actually co-dominant trees because there are a lot of hardwoods. And so some of the pines will sprout back up and they'll survive because they survive well on a 1-year rotation. But we'll lose a little bit of these hardwoods. So we have to keep some of the hardwoods in the non-managed area, and we have to keep some hardwoods in the 2-year rotation so that we have that hardwood masting. I'm not worried about there being a lack of hardwood mast because we have 3 tupelo swamps on site. Tupelo gums produce little berries that are like candy for most wildlife species. And there's a few beech trees on site too, and beech trees are like, between beech and mulberries, those are probably the 2 most sought after and most fought after mass producing species of tree that wildlife love. So it doesn't look like much now. It all kind of looks like the same now. And that is important. We do want it to be contiguous so everything does stick together, and we do have the genetic diversity. Some seeds of the native cane will come from over there, and seeds of the native cane will migrate up here and all sorts of stuff like that. But give me about 10 years, come back in about 15 years, and you'll see there will be a pretty drastic difference among each of the three. If you want to attend one that has been going for a little while, the Hichati Experimental Forest, which is in the South Oconee National Forest, has been doing an experimental forest for a little while. And then Whitehall, associated with UGA, University of Georgia, they have an experimental forest too, where you can see like this was planted in loblolly pines in 1998, and it was burned in 2012, and then there was a selective harvest in 2015. It's like they have signs that say all of that. So that's a really cool area. That's kind of what we're trying to build, but we want to make it more educational. So this is the stuff that I'm talking about, the girdling. You can see that those two trees back there were girdled and they've died, and so they're falling over. The trees that were all girdled in here were sweet gums. And sweet gums can be really, really prolific and take over. They are a native tree, but they don't have a lot of wildlife value. And so we kind of wanted to get rid of the sweet gums and leave room for the oaks and the like hornbeams and some more of like the maple species and mulberries and stuff like that that actually provide much more of a fruit and mass value. This is our patch of pawpaws. They are not fruiting yet, but I keep an eye on them every day.
You ever eat any pawpaw?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I love a pawpaw. There's fruits. Oh yeah, there's a little tiny ones up there. In the leaves? Those are from bugs. The bugs will chew on the leaves. So see this branch that comes out right here, just below that vulture? See the little fruits hanging up? They'll get to be about that big. Like little tiny potatoes. And when they're ripe, they're really delicious. They're like my second favorite. Like my third favorite wild foraged fruits.
Number one.
Mulberries. Yeah, there's a couple of signs. That's the Kusawati and the Etowah River. These are signs for the different rivers and sort of their significance. I spent a lot of my research on the Itchaway-Notchaway. It's a tributary. It's a large tributary of the Flint River down in southwest Georgia. And they say the translation is place where the deer sleep. That's not true. It's actually this away, that away. But it translates to more of the philosophy of where the deer lie, the deer sleep. This away, that away. Where the deer lie, that away. The deer sleep this way. Just a little tidbit of how we're wrong, and me being here is going to make us better. Here's some poison ivy. Don't touch it. So see, this hasn't been burned in a couple of years. But you can tell there used to be fire here because there's yucca. Is anybody a bird person? A birder? Sweet, I can lie to you. Those are Swainson's warblers. I'm assuming they're Swainson warblers because Swainson warblers are really... No, not Swainson. Yeah, Swainson warblers are little small birds that look kind of like sparrows, but they really, really, really love wetland environments like this. They love the swampiness. They love the thick mid-story and the thick understory and the really closed-in canopy. They do sing, yeah. You can hear them chirping. So this thing right here is a tupelo swamp, or a tupelo gum, I mean, or a black gum, a Nyssa sylvatica. You can see that its big giant bowl is what really helps it survive that the really aquatic environment. Just past that one, the big tree that's kind of straight back with the scaly bark is a river birch. or Black River birch, which is another native wetland tolerant tree species. And the cool thing about this area is if you come in here at certain times of the year, this will be completely covered in water and you can jump off, except it's black water, and so you won't really be able to see the ground, so you'll end up jumping down onto logs like that. And if you're in waders, then you tear your waders, and then you get really mad because it's your only dry waders. And then you quit researching aquatic species and you move to terrestrial mammals. Put a finger down. That happened to me? Okay. Yeah, bottomland hardwoods. That's what we'll talk about here. The cool thing about one of the many cool things about wetland is that they're highly unpredictable. They could be wet, they could be dry, they could be anything in between, but the soil is relatively poorly draining on any given time period. And when the soil stays really wet, the trees have to form different physical expressions to survive a wetland environment like this. And so it's really common for trees to just fall over exactly where you don't want them to fall over. So you lose 5 feet of your deck space that you thought you could fit more people in. Because you also can't really get tractors in here to pull out something like this. And so whenever I bring people out here, I'm like, no, this is awesome. Like, look at how much change can occur within 2 years out in a wetland environment like this. But trees make certain adaptations, like the buttress roots or the big boles that we've seen. And then we'll just sit here in quiet for a minute because there's a lot of forest interior birds that we'll call. And if anyone has the Marlin app, that's a really good app to pull out and kind of identify some bird calls. Eventually, if we sit here in quiet for too long, though, the mosquitoes will start getting in our ears. That's the Carolina wren. That's the titmouse back here. That's a woodpecker. Blue jay up in that tree right there in front of us. Going back to mosaic habitats, this is one of our mosaics. We have a wetland. These are actually, you guys are so lucky. You guys are seeing the northernmost by latitude Tupelo swamps, probably in the United States. I think South Carolina has some that are higher, that are further north by latitude, but these are the ones that are the most inland. So I think if you look at it that way, we have the most inland. So ultimately, if a fire ever went through here, it would knock out the majority of these tupelos. Which thankfully it's such a slow regime that it probably won't happen in any of our lifetimes. That, and we manage the surrounding area with fire, and I will be backing fire into this area. uh, which means that it will creep along in the dry areas and leave a bunch of not dry areas, and those are called fire shadows. Fire shadows are incredibly important because they're areas that don't burn, where any of the wildlife that's in the fire can actually move to and navigate and survive as refugia. Those are really important to have, but they're also kind of naturally occurring. So like that's why we don't work. That's why we set fire to an entire woodlot and don't worry about any of the animals, because the majority of them go underground, are intuitive enough to go up into a tree, figure out where the fire shadows are, or if they can, they just book it out of there. I've only ever heard one story where a squirrel caught a tail on fire and started bounding out. They had a bunch of spots where they had to go put out because they followed this squirrel's fire trail. It may have been a rabbit, as I've heard it from 3 different people. And diversity of species in the understory. Wetlands flood and drain, and flood and drain. And so a lot of different like salamanders and frogs really love this type of habitat. And then like ducks are particularly fond of like flooded woodlands, because there's the seeds that come from when the like this jewelweed down here that has the little piper things coming off. That jewelweed produces a flower that's really good for pollinators. It produces seeds that dabbling ducks love, and other songbirds and everything. So there's like a massive diversity of species that occur that are excellent for wildlife in the wetlands, because of that disturbance, because of the water disturbance. So the key takeaway from today is that disturbance is important, and just take that in as a metaphor for your own life too. It's the same rule as like what the Navy SEALs, I think. They're like, get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're constantly disturbing yourself, then you're always learning. You're always changing, hopefully for the better. That's the catalyzers network too, right?
Yes.
Except we don't change ourselves. We change the world.
Boom. Done. Changing the world. I was gonna ask about that because you were just like tromping through the forest, and it's so like contrary to what a lot of like you go places and they're like, don't touch anything, or right, and you were just like, whatevs, just. And I guess that's good.
There are highly sensitive ecosystems, and there are 2 that come to my mind off the top of my head. One is the brackish ecosystems, because those plants don't necessarily recover well from disturbance. And the other is granite outcrops, because granite outcrops, they're oxymoronic. They're cool because they're really tough, because they have to survive regularly 120, 130 degree temperatures in the summertime, and freezing temperatures without any cover in the wintertime. And like if they're so small and there's barely any dirt or anything for them to grasp onto. So like really like tough, but they're really not that responsive to disturbances that they're not used to. So wetlands and rock outcroppings were considered wastelands back in the 60s and 70s and everything. Like wetlands in particular, until the Clean Water Act came out in 1972-ish, when people would just fill them or cover them. Right now, the issue that we're kind of seeing and dealing with is that granite outcroppings are either dumped on with trash, with people's trash, or they're being loaded up with solar panels. And the solar panels are going to shade out all of those native plant species that only occur on granite outcroppings. Like you've got the diamorpha, the red diamorpha, that's super cool. You've got a ton of different lichens. You've got the infamous lowercase c Confederate daisy. There's a festival for that, I think, on Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain is the biggest granite outcrop, but look at Stone Mountain, where all the people have walked. There's like no plant life there. So they're really sensitive to disturbance. So there's some ecosystems that are highly sensitive to disturbance, and there are some ecosystems that are maintained by disturbance. So quick even quicker breakdown of that is look at the National Forest managed properties up in North Georgia, where the fire exclusion was like suppression was the main goal. Anytime a fire occurred, suppression was the main goal. Those are closed in, deeply closed in canopies, forests with barely anything in the understory. They might have some muscadine where a tree fell down one time, something like that. And then look at like the longleaf pine savanna down in southwest Georgia on some of the quail plantations. Those are maintained by disturbance, and what you're doing by what you're doing with the disturbance is what's called arresting the seer. So you're stopping the ecological progression and succession through time. So if you burn a bunch of stuff off, you've top killed some things, and then it can only grow up. If you mow your lawn in your backyard, which you shouldn't, but that's just my opinion. I'm against lawns. I don't know if you guys know that, but lawns are terrible. If you're mowing your back lawn, you're arresting the seer, but grass responds well to that. So you're stopping the hardwoods from growing up and taking over everything. If you're not arresting the seer, if you're not stopping the progression of ecological succession, you'll eventually wind up with what's called a climax forest. And a climax forest looks more like this, or looks like what you see on the North Carolina or Georgia along the Appalachian Trail. That has been no management done whatsoever, so it has grown up to what it's climaxed to be. This has a little bit more disturbance based on the water. The grassland has the most amount of disturbance based on mowing and fire. So you're arresting that seer consistently. You never end up with anything above this height. If you want to see a really, really good grassland that has been being restored for 20 plus years, Panola Mountain has a grassland that actually supports dick thistles, it's a bird that needs like 3 acres minimum of contiguous grassland. So Panola Mountain is a really good opportunity to see the difference from our partial Bahia field that we're working on to what it could be in 20 years from now. Yeah, everything will eventually have a disturbance. That's the key. Your house will eventually have a disturbance. If it's tornadoes, if it's hurricanes, if it's flooding, if it's fire, everything has a disturbance. If it's a bear that's coming in because he smells the donuts that you have in your kitchen, yeah. Don't leave donuts out in your car if you're in bear country, because they can operate doors now. But don't be afraid of a bear. Just make yourself big and yell at it. I've seen a bunch of bears, and I just do this. Ah! And they run away. It's true. Also, if I can teach you guys one last thing while I'm thinking about safety. Always flick, never smash. People have this, they see something, see a bee or whatever, they want to smack it. It stings you. Just flick it. Flick it. Whatever you feel on the back of your neck, don't go like this. Because if you go like this and then you roll it and it's a wasp, it's going to sting you 7 times down your entire neck. But if you just flick it off of you, learn something new every day. Speaking from lots of experience. If it's in Georgia and it stings you, I've been stung by it. I got stung by a tarantula hawk on the neck one time. The burrowing wasps that we have here with the abdomens, or the thorax? The thoraxes that are thoraces? Let's see. Well, I'll get into the etymology later tonight when I get to nerd out by myself. But they got like they're like this long. I got stung on the neck one time and it swelled up about 4 times its normal size. That was the worst sting I've ever had. No, the worst stings I've ever had was the yellow jacket hive, or maybe the wasp hive, maybe the fire ant hive. I don't know. I can't keep track. We who live in the woods for a job get attacked a lot. I've never been bit by a venomous snake, although I was almost bit by a venomous snake in March, right before my wedding, which would have been hilarious. Diamondback. I kneeled on it.
But like you didn't
which is the thing.
No, I kneeled on it.
No, you did get bitten.
Oh, I didn't get bit. Right, yeah.
Yeah.
People are like, you're just gonna get bitten anytime you get near it. And it's like they really.
Oh no, absolutely
they
not.
don't
No.
want to bite you.
My college roommate, my PhD roommate was he did a diamondback project. So he actually tracked diamondbacks, and he would call me out every once in a while because he'd be like, "Hey, where's this diamondback?" And I would be standing like, here's the snake. There's a log here, and I'd be standing at this log, just going like this. Bro, I have no idea. He's like, it's right there, and all of a sudden it kind of like comes in. But they rely so heavily on that cryptic camouflage that they don't want to strike. They don't want to waste the energy, especially if it's a cooler morning or something like that. They would much rather hide from you. And so what had happened was I was on a property that has gopher tortoises. So I was like, gopher tortoises, they form a big open burrow that a bunch of different animals use. Like 350 minimum species have once used it. I actually have a publication showing that fox squirrels use gopher tortoise burrows. So one of the ways that you can view into a gopher tortoise burrow is you take your phone, you reflect the sunlight into it, and that's a lot brighter than a flashlight because you can actually see what's kind of on the apron. And so I did that, and I'm like, yeah. So I just usually do that to make sure that it's clear, and then I go and I'll like show off a little bit more about like, oh, this is where they enter. Like, there's tunnels right here. This is the apron. They usually keep this area clear. So I was literally like this. I was like, here's the blah blah blah, and I got up and I walked back around, and the people who were with me were like, and where I was just kneeling on this stick, a diamondback just uncoiled and slithered down into the hole, and I was like, oh, cool. And everyone was like, I was like, don't worry about it. It's fine. Just watch me for the next 2 hours and make sure my blood doesn't boil, and otherwise we're fine. Are you recording all of that?
Multiple ways.
Great.
Multiple ways.
Great. This is the last stop I had. We can walk around some more. We can call it a day. We can answer some questions.
Earlier you were saying a word, I think referring to the top level of the.
Top killing?
No, you were saying like duff. Is that right?
Duff. Yeah.
How do you spell that? Is that like Hillary
DUFF.
Duff?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
There's a couple of different layers. There's your clay layer, then there's the A horizon, the B horizon, and then there's the organic layer, and in that organic layer there's humus, not hummus, not the. I know it sounds delicious. Trust me, it's not. And then there's like the top organic. There's the duff. There's the humus, the duff, and then there's the top organic layer. Duff is just the breaking down of the organic layer into the like humus and then into the topsoil. So all of that is the topsoil that's like really rich. And grasslands have had topsoil layers that are like this, and over the course of ages and ages of farming, they now have topsoil layers that are tilled and distributed, not nearly as rich in micro and macronutrients. So the duff is just one of the soil layers, but it's a part of the organic layer, and it's kind of like a punky log. I'll find an example real quick. This stuff. That's like a punky log, which is just like partially rotten. It's pretty wet. That will eventually become duff. So if I try to light this, it's not really going to light very well. But you'll see that little tiny smoldering, eventually it can smolder through like that. And then as the wind picks up, it glows a little bit more.
So when we were talking about burn licenses, you mentioned one term that was like mixing height with respect to the smoke in the air.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different weather factors that people have to look at when they want to do fire, and it's special to meteorologists and to prescribed burners. So like when you look at your weather, you think, oh, it's going to rain today, it's going to be sunny, the temperature's going to be hot, it might be humid. We look at all of those because high heat makes less predictable fire behavior. Because obviously hotter, more fire, less hot. So if you're burning at 30 degrees, it's not going to be as outrageous than if you're burning at 90 degrees because everything is hotter already. So then there's fuel moisture content that you have to look at because if there's water in it, it's not going to burn as easy. We just witnessed that. Then you have to look at atmospheric things like the dispersion index, where the wind is going to take whatever particulate matter you kick up into there. Then you have to look at the mixing heights. That's going to be where the atmospheric inversion table is. So where the temperatures switch and I'm not a meteorologist, so this is the basic explanation. And the transport winds kind of maintained or are maintained. So you're looking at mixing height. It's really more of like the gas exchange. So if you basically when you light a prescribed fire, it's mostly water vapor and some carbon like in the form of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide that's evaporating or escaping. And so that's going to be mixed in at the mixing height and then transported around. So if your mixing height is super high, then you can move your smoke a lot further. But if the mixing height drops and there's a high fog potential, then you drop your smoke down onto someone else. So that's what prescribed fire management really is smoke management. We can, if it escapes, we can deal with it. But like I said at the beginning, we can't smoke out and like an active adult elderly committee because or a hospital or something along those lines. Like we can't smoke those out because people are unhealthy there a lot of the times. There's some punky logs.
Why punky?
I don't know. That's the term that I heard, and that's the term that I stuck to.
Can we eat the punky
I'm No, it's very. It seems wet, but it's also very dry. And so when you eat it, it pulls out all of the moisture from your mouth, and then you wind up like, I need water for a really long period of time afterwards. Trust me, I've done everything. Just ask me any questions that you want to. This is why I love to have kids around because they ask me the questions that I'm like, yeah, I've done that. I tried it. You guys think about good stuff. Keep thinking about good stuff. It's a nice damselfly. Couple of them. Those are the arum. They're arum something. And then the ones next to it that they're landing on right now are that's jewelweed. The jewelweed's super valuable in Cherokee medicine. They would use it to treat bug bites and rashes and stuff. So I actually keep ice cubes of jewelweed. Like I grind up jewelweed, put it in water, and then put it in an ice cube tray, and I leave that in my freezer because I get stung all the time. I mean, I've already been stung 3 times this year. I do keep bees though, so 2 of them were my own fault. And then I just put that on like a mosquito bite or an ant bite or something. It works wonders. The jewelweed is one of the few Cherokee and indigenous American medicines that I have really found that works well. That and geranium or crane's is a good natural mosquito repellent. This is a great area to come forage for mushrooms too. Like chanterelles will grow like right up in this area where it transitions from really wet to kind of drier. But the easy ones are really easy. And I tend to stick to the easy ones. There was only one time when I was really venturous. And I thought I ate some oysters, but turns out they were actually ID'd later as angel wings, which killed one guy in Japan because he had some kidney issues or some liver issues or something. So I ate them thinking they were oysters, and then I later discovered that they were not oysters. And I was like, I'm going to stay away from oysters for a little while now. But like chanterelles, chicken of the woods, and lion's manes are the three that are super distinct, really easy to tell apart from anything else. And then morels, but we don't really have that many morels around here. The only morels I've found near here were in Talladega National Forest.
Is it legal to forage somewhere like here?
This is private property, so it is very legal to forage if you have Georgia Wildlife Federation's permission.
Oh, okay.
But foraging on, like, if you have a land pass or if you have a hunting license or something like that, you can go in the WMAs, and I don't think there's any real issues with foraging on WMAs. If you're looking for like points or artifacts or something like that, then there's an issue.
I see.
But if you're on private property and you have permission to be on private property, you can look for points and you can look for mushrooms.
Gotcha.
Here comes Boss Man to come yell at us. And by yell at us, I mean say hey. I didn't do it.
How are you doing? Everybody having a big time? Yeah. Good. Good to see you. I'm Mike. Hi, Frank. How you been?
They've definitely learned probably not that much useful, but a lot.
Yeah, well, good. Hey, Mike. It's a pleasure to see all y'all. Good. Good.
We're sort of wrapping up the science side of everything, so if you want to answer any questions about why this exists and why we're here.
Oh, okay.
I didn't talk anything about that.
Well, thank y'all for coming out. We, Georgia Wildlife Federation has been around since 1936. We're the oldest of all the conservation organizations here in the state. So, a lot of our records are archived at the Harvard Library. Environmental work here in Georgia. So I think us and 3 or 4, they add another organization or two every couple of years. So I don't know how many they've got up there. But quite frankly, having them take our records and archive them up there made them a lot easier for us to find. Because we just basically shipped just a huge file cabinets full of papers, and they went through them and archived them all and arranged them. And so the hydrology up here is interesting. So this wetland will dry oftentimes during the summer, not every summer, but oftentimes. And EPA is done. You'll see some poles out here. Those are, I guess, piezometers or whatever the EPA calls them. They do training out here. They're actually going to be out for a couple times to train some of their folks, but they do like surface water and then groundwater looks. And so rain up here on sort of the upper part where you just looked at the burned area soaks in. It's slightly underneath the ground, so that's how the tupelos stay healthy. It's not surface water, so you look back there and it's just completely dry, totally toasty, mud cracked and all that kind of stuff. But just beneath the surface, there's a lot of water, so the trees are able to stay hydrated.
Yeah.
It's a cool place. It's a cool place to get to work every day, come to the office, and we're really trying to figure out things that make sense. So the property is set here for years. We've had it. We have TV shows that have filmed out here, all kinds of stuff like that. But really trying to make it answer the needs of conservation and advance some of the things that we try and do here, like with the prescribed fire. That's why we're trying to do this demonstration area up here. It's also why we obviously we're trying to protect and maintain some of these areas, but the reality is we're a nonprofit. We can only own so much land, but what we can do is use the land that we've got to demonstrate some of the management practices that everybody can. So it's just a force multiplier for us and in the mission that we do. So it's just it's a way for us to really kind of make a bigger contribution than we can just by protecting 100 acres, or 120 acres or whatever this is. So we've got a similar piece of property not far from here that really is has a lot longer border with the Alcovy River. It's a cool piece of property, and we're going to see what we can figure out to do with that as well. But those are kind of the things we do. We're mostly an advocacy group. We mostly work at the state capitol on issues of with legislation, whether it's hunting, fishing, or just general, conservation issues. And that's where I guess Amy and I get to work together a lot more than anywhere else. And so, we kind of run the gamut of that kind of stuff. But it's really cool for y'all to be out here and taking a look at it. And
Yeah, this is science. Welcome to science. It's one of the branches of it. One of the branches of it.
Yeah. So y'all have any questions of me? I wasn't going to come out. I really just want to come by and say hey, and thank y'all for coming out today. So any questions?
If you don't follow Georgia Wildlife Federation on Facebook, you need to. He does some really, really good posts.
So if you want to hear more from me,
but so we're delighted to have y'all here. If you have any groups that you're part of that you want to bring out, let us know. We're glad to show the place around.
found an armadillo.
Yeah.
It is one of those invasives that we're.
Wash your hands after you handle that one.
Yeah, that's one that we're not that excited about having. They dig holes. They generally cause some problems, and they can be a host for leprosy. So,
In theory, the
You just gave my kids leprosy.
no. In theory, the ones that occur east of the Mississippi River do not carry leprosy, but the ones that are west of the Mississippi River came from Texas and are more of a native population, or Texas and Mexico up, and they probably carry leprosy. But that's kind of theory, and that probably doesn't necessarily. Generally, it's accepted that the ones in Georgia don't have leprosy. But wash your hands.
washing your hands will be good enough.
Yeah. Oh yeah, soap and water gets rid of it.
Yeah. All right, folks. Thanks for coming by.
A lot of wild animals have COVID too.
True.
Yeah. Deer.
Yeah, it has
deer,
moved. It has moved to
mink.
deer. There's also a really gnarly bird flu going around right now in birds that could potentially transfer over.
Yeah.
It's probably an owl feather, so don't show anybody it.
Are the owls endangered or?
Predatory birds and migratory birds are protected under different acts. Predatory birds, the birds of prey, are the raptors are protected under a specific thing, and it is federally illegal for you to have something that belongs to whatever. But the Atlanta PD doesn't know what an owl feather is. If I ever went to specifically a Forest Service, I don't even know, officer of some sort, then they would find me. Sweet gum has a lot of turpentine in it, so you can actually use it to brush your teeth. If you take a little stalk like this and break it up, then you can brush your teeth with it. It's got a little bit of a cleaning agent. If you're ever lost in the wilderness.
I've heard there's a diversity of pawpaw tastes.
Yeah,
Pawpaw
I think
flavors.
there's either 2 or 3 species that occur in Georgia. There's the slender leaf pawpaw, and then there's which occurs more in the coastal plain. And they're not as custardy, they're drier.
Yeah.
It's same as persimmons. Like if you eat a persimmon that hasn't fallen on the ground, basically, if you can't tickle it off, then it's gonna be really astringent, and you're not gonna have any moisture in your mouth anymore. That's the rule about fruit for me. You gotta tickle it off, because if you have to pluck it at all, then it's probably not ready. But if you just kind of tap it and it falls off in your hand, it's ready to go.
What sort of statistical tools do you use?
For this, nothing, because it's pseudo-replicated.
Yeah.
But for all of my research that I've done, I just all code it all in R.
Is there a particular, is it spatial stats? Or
Yeah, I use
particular-
GIS a lot. I use GIS.
Okay.
I use ArcMap and R to get all of my. Between those two, I get my models. My generally I'm an occupancy habitat specialist, and then so you take those and then you plug those back into the map based on the map characteristics or the data that you found on the ground. You can then create that map model for predicting where an animal will occur. That's more of what my research has been on. My other favorite place is Hoopy Dunes. So if I can put a plug in for Hooping Dunes, that's one of my favorite places in the state. It's over by Dublin. And it goes from like xeric sandhills, true sandy soils, and then they're dunes, they're old Aeolian dunes, and then it goes down into like longleaf pine savanna, and then it goes down into knobby knee, like Okefenokee style swamps within a quarter mile. Like that's the next place. It's a drive, but that's the next place that anyone should go.
Well, JT, thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I appreciate y'all's interest, and holler at me anytime. I'm around.